Welcome to episode 44 of 5 Drinks for Midnight, the show where we bring the questions, guests bring the drinks, and we try to wrap up before midnight. Today, we're talking to Donal O'Gallachoir, National Brand Manager, Bottle Washer, and co-founder of Glendalough Distillery. But before we do, hit the likes, hit the subscribes, do everything so you can stay up to date with what we're doing. Let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us. 5 Drinks or Midnight. 5 drinks, 5 questions, midnight, whatever comes first. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today, sir?
I am good. No complaints at all, Tim. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking with you and just being able to engage and have a good conversation around a couple of good spirits of ours and be able to tell a bit of our story and have a bit of crack, as we say in Ireland.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to digging into these. But first, before we get started, I just want to say congratulations on the the golds from San Francisco, double gold and gold. So, I mean, that's a really fucking good accomplishment for some really great whiskey. So, congratulations.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I guess our first thing is, which one are we cracking open first?
So what we're going to go to first, and I thought this was very appropriate, we're going to go with our poaching. And a lot of people don't know what poaching is, but poaching is it's essentially a precursor to whiskey. So it's where whiskey originated from. A lot of people say it's the first spirit ever distilled. Dates back by some records to 584 AD to monastic settlements in Ireland. And whiskey evolved from it. So it was called poaching, which is a Gaelic word for what comes from the pot still. Putta is a pot still. Poaching, the sort of flowery Irish language, it means what comes from a pot still. It was also called Ishkabaha. So Ishkabaha, water of life. English couldn't really say that when they came to Ireland and got a taste for this. They started calling it Ishki and then whiskey from there. So this is where it all started. Every bottle on a back bar, every bottle in a liquor store, all has its roots in this ancient spirit. And that was first distilled in monastic settlements like Glendalough, where we're from, and where I was pretty much born and raised just a couple of miles away from.
Excellent. Well, cheers.
Cheers. Tim, a lot of people will ask, how do you drink poaching? And my sort of silly answer is in a rush with a purpose. But in essence, this is a precursor to whiskey, as I say, but it's 100% malted barley base that can deviate. You can use fruits, you can use even like sugar beet and different grains within that. Typically unaged. First distilled in Ireland by some records back in the 6th century. It was outlawed in 1661 on Christmas Day. That didn't, by the English, King Charles II, bit of a bastard, long story. But that didn't stop people making it. Outlawed from 1661 till 1997. And a handful of families and a handful of regions really kept this infamous spirit alive.
Excellent. I gotta tell you, St. Kevin is really glowing from your glass. So whatever the sunlight is coming in, I hope that it picks it up, because it's really picking up off you get some really cool flares. But
nice. That was completely planned. Yeah, I planned all of that.
Oh, this is so good.
So this is 100% malted barley base, double distilled. What I love about this is it keeps that strong malt characteristic. It gets like bready and almost yeasty quality to it. Big, thick mouthfeel. You know, that pot still distillation keeps that weight to it. You'll see it down the side of the glass. Has this little bit of pepper, a little bit of spice in the back end. But it's just a strong malt bready component to it. It's like a rustic early form of whiskey. And what some people would say is what mezcal is to tequila, your poaching is to Irish whiskey.
This is just so...
And people are doing some really cool stuff with poaching within Ireland. People are messing around with the mash bill. Essentially, we originally used malted barley and sugar beet within our earliest forms of our earliest batches of poaching, which gave it this like sweet but also almost vegetable quality to it, which was crazy, and it was almost this sort of very, very savory note as well. But people are doing stuff where they're incorporating fruit within it. They're incorporating short periods of aging. They're incorporating really crazy stuff with it. And there's a lot of flexibility within the technical file around poaching. And it's this weird, cool subcategory of Irish whiskey. It's its own category, essentially. And people doing some really interesting, innovative stuff. And as Irish whiskey grows, I think more and more interest is going to actually sort of start shining on poaching itself. Such a rich history. It was ingrained with folklore and tradition. People used to rub it on greyhounds before races so they'd run faster. Don't know if that did it. People used to rub it on their hands if they had arthritis as a sort of home remedy, or on their muscles after playing like Gaelic football, which is a Gaelic game, so like a sport back in Ireland. And it's just wrapped up in fairy tale and mystery. And, you know, again, as I said, it was kept alive by a handful of families in a couple of regions. And for a lot of Ireland, it was the only source of revenue, of income for certain areas of Ireland. It outsold Irish whiskey for hundreds of years. At the height of distillation within Ireland, you'll actually see a map behind me here. It was estimated that there was 200 licensed distilleries in your towns and in your cities, but up to 1,800 illicit stills, which were poaching distillers. And it was actually, this was the drink of the common person. This was the average person's drink. And there's just fascinating stories around it. It was put down with like furious vengeance and violence and stuff by the British government. A lot of time, a lot of restrictions were actually put on it. If they caught a still on a town, they'd put a fine on the whole town. So people used to distill on town lines so that they could dispute it. And there's a lot of cat and mouse stories with poaching, and it's part of our own distilling heritage. Countless stories around it, and it's just some sort of somewhat untold heritage of distillation within Ireland. You have these illicit bars called she-beans, and most people drank poaching really back in the day. And we think it's really cool. It's actually the first thing that we ever released was poaching. So it's very strong in our roots and in our veins.
Good. Well, then that gets us in. I mean, question one then is, I guess, really, how did you get started in the spirits industry? I heard you started at the age of 17, and that your family actually is not from the spirits industry. So, like, you didn't grow up you weren't like, oh, my grandfather owned a bar, and that's how but like you just started at the age of 17.
Well, within Ireland, if you go back into someone's family's tree and you go back far enough, you'll find someone's, whatever uncle or someone's great uncle was a maltster or worked at Guinness's or whatever. So if you really wanted to, spin a yarn, spin a story, you probably could. I don't. I started at the age of 17, and I actually started doing promos. So I got linked up with this agency. I had never really had any interest in school. It's like secondary school or high school. So I didn't really go a lot. And I was more interested in working and going out in part-time jobs and stuff like that. So I was just trying to hustle. And then so I actually started doing promotions with this crowd called CMS Marketing, right? And they did promos for Jameson, for Bulmer's Irish Cider, which is called Magners over here, for Murphy's Stout. They did a lot for Guinness. They did some stuff for Napo Castle Irish single malts. And it was essentially going into bars, and they'd have different promotions, whether it was like Jameson and ginger back in the day or whatever. And you'd go in and you'd talk it up with the customers, and you'd buy drinks, and you'd get it going, you'd take photos, and you'd make people go into competitions or whatever it may be. And I was very social and outgoing, and I was very good at that, and I started to get managing teams doing that. So when they'd have like an area of Leinster, I'd look after all the Leinster places, so I'd make sure everyone was doing what they should be doing. Then I started to be brought in on these sort of conversations when they're meeting with, the Jameson people or the Magnus people or whatever. And then I sort of realized, I should probably focus a little bit more on school. And so I did like my final year of school, I took it very seriously and I did very well, which was actually surprising. So I kept on that role throughout university. And after university, I loved that I wanted to work within something around that space. And I got linked up with an independent bottler at the time, now the distillery brand, which was Walsh Whiskey. So I got dropped into Atlanta, Georgia, with very limited resources or knowledge or what have you like that, and really learned the business from the ground up from there. Everything from staff education to dealing with your distributor to retailers to all the glamorous stuff that people don't talk about too much. But learned the business, and then we brought that state from 300 cases to 3,500 cases in the state of Georgia. And then we actually launched that brand nationally with an importer called Palm Bay International, and it was an absolutely amazing experience and learned everything. And I went as a young guy in the industry, launching an Irish whiskey brand in front of 300 sales reps. It was huge, and I really relished it. I loved it. I learned everything I could. But every time I would go back to Ireland, I would always meet up with my cousin Barry, and who worked around the drinks industry as well. I used to meet up with him, and then we used to have pints. We used to just sort of talk about what was going on firsthand within Irish being one. And at that time within Irish whiskey, it was Jameson, it was Busmills, it was Tullamore, and everybody seen Irish whiskey as a shot. And additionally, we're witnessing firsthand what people were doing at the early ages of the American craft distilling revival, where people were looking at their own heritage of like Pennsylvania rye, Maryland rye, and they're looking at these wheated bourbons, and they're doing really cool stuff, which sort of fascinated us. And both of us worked within the Irish whiskey circle. And if you work within the Irish whiskey circle, of this deep heritage that I alluded to with poaching, and I'm sure we'll get into it down the line of where Ireland used to be a powerhouse globally within the whiskey world, and that nearly wiped out. And now people sort of overlooked what Irish whiskey was. Serious whiskey drinkers overlooked Irish, didn't take it seriously, seen it as light, sweet, typically drank as a shot in an Irish bar. And it sort of got our backs up, and we just sort of talked more and more about it. And it ended up being a group of 5 of us that used to meet for pints and used to talk about it. And we had this sort of pipe dream. And then in 2013 we set up the Glendalough Distillery. And then that's when I started getting grey hair. I had no grey hair before then, none whatsoever. And then I started self-distributing poaching back in the day in Dublin. Then I used to do export markets, so begging distributors in France and Germany and Scandinavia, please take some of our stuff. Then I moved over here. I don't know how many years ago now at this stage, but I moved over to the US to run the US, which was 1 state, and then turned into 2, then turned into 7, and our multiple distributors, and then we just sort of scaled up bit by bit by bit. But we started very, very small scale and with a very limited budget, and sort of just grew and grew and grew from there. And thank God we're successful now. We're getting a lot of accolades and a lot of press. We have a growing team and nice partnerships, and just trying to do things in the right way and sort of tell a bit more of our story.
That's awesome. I think that's a great fucking origin story, because it was 5 guys sitting down. Usually when that conversation starts, especially here in America, but if it's like 5 guys sitting at the pub going, we should start a distillery, everybody's like, yeah, and then the next day, nothing. But you guys went and fucking did it. So that is amazing. So I think for an origin story, that is fucking cool as hell, because you just went out and you actually drunken did it. So that is amazing. So
it was a very different landscape then, because there's 3 large distilleries within Ireland, You know, you know, and I know who they are. Is obviously the Middleton Distillery, Bushmills, and Cooley, and everyone focused on blended Irish whiskey and was very price conscious. And as I said, typically seen as a shot and what have you like that. And we decided not to do any blends whatsoever and age things barrel by barrel and do sort of try to do flavor profiles that we felt weren't represented and people would resonate to, you know, and you know, a lot of people probably thought it was a bit stupid and a bit like, well, you know, if 95% of all Irish whiskey sales are blends, you know, whatever, call it like $25, call it $30, then why are you releasing single malts at 55? And why are you releasing a single grain? Nobody knows what that is. And you know, all of that stuff. There was some stuff available, but there was no focus on it. So we all of our whiskeys are completely singular in style. So nothing's blended, nothing's mass produced, and all of it's aged barrel by barrel. All non-chill filtered, so keeping the oils in. And then just sort of hunting these flavor profiles that are not really represented. And really sort of like make remarkably different Irish whiskies. And it's like what Oscar Wilde said, the worst thing being talked about is not being talked about. So we just want to have noteworthy whiskeys and people talk about them. And hopefully, you know, if we did that for long enough, people would keep on buying them, or maybe buy them once anyway.
Well, that's question one. Super easy.
Perfect.
All right, on to question two. What are we drinking next?
So, what we are going to go to next, this is our double barrel. Let me see, let me get that back in the shot there a little bit better. So this is our flagship whiskey. We often call this a gateway Irish whiskey because it's light and it's bright and it's inviting to people who maybe are only familiar with that blended style, that light, sweet Irish whiskey. Also, your bourbon drinkers typically like that sweeter style. So it hits on all of that, but then it over delivers and gives this complexity, gives this sort of what am I tasting, why am I tasting the component on the back end, this dark cherry and fig note. And the flavor profile, we worked extremely hard to really try to get right on this. And I'd probably start with the style itself. So this is a single grain whiskey, and single grain whiskey actually has its roots within Ireland and within poaching, funnily enough. So your poaching itself was, as we sort of spoke about, was sort of violently tried to be put down. And you had these British tax agents that were sort of went around with armed people and were putting it down. And there's a lot of sort of harrowing accounts of that. And one of those was by Aeneas Coffey. Aeneas Coffey was a British tax agent within Ireland. And he became fanatical in how poaching distillers were distilling. He thought it was very inefficient, essentially, you know, cut points by taste, by smell, you know, open flame, all that we talked about from there. And he actually developed a new kind of still, and he was very humble and shit like that. So he named it after himself, called it a coffee still, Coffey. But to his own detriment, he tried to go flog that in Ireland. And no one was really having any of it because he's the ex-British tax agent. The licensed distilleries weren't fond of him, and the unlicensed distilleries definitely weren't fond of him at all. So he peddled it over in Scotland, and that's the sort of archetype to the blend as well. The single grain whiskey with the majority of blends, which actually somehow had a downfall within Irish whiskey, which we might talk about a little bit later on. But your single grain or your coffee still is where the majority of your bourbon comes from, and also your cult Japanese whiskeys, Nika coffee grain, coffee malt. But at its essence, this is an Irish style that has been somewhat underutilized. And it was originated in Ireland, the original patent still and coffee still. But the original patent for it was 1832, if my memory serves me correct. And so the style itself is light and bright, and it absolutely sucks the marrow out of the casks. And we wanted to really focus on that and bring two elements into it. So we use a mash bill of malted barley and organic corn, a very high efficient distilling to it. And then we're going to go 3 years, 3 months in a first fill bourbon cask, ex-wild turkey char level number 4. And then after 3 years, 3 months, we're actually going to transfer those 3 casks over to an Olorosa sherry cask, also first filled from Montilla in Spain. And it's going to spend the remaining 9 months within that cask. So 4 years total. And non-chill filtered as all of our whiskies, brought down to 42% and bottled. And this whiskey it's a tale of two casks. You know, I think there needs to be some analogy to a mullet going on. I've never been able to get it on. You know, what is it? All party, was it like business in the front, party at the back?
Yeah.
I don't know what the analogy is, but it's solid bourbon cask in the front. It's typical bourbon cask, butterscotch, toffee, vanilla, right on the nose. Tiny bit of maybe sort of lemon citrus coming through right there. Down the legs, down the side. Super quick, light, bright, lively. You can see there, they hit the side of the glass straight down. And then when we taste the whiskey, cheers, cilantro, to your health. It's that continuation of that, like that brown sugar and butterscotch. And initially, on the tip of the tongue, mid-palate changes. It's that maraschino cherry, it's that deep fig, that sultana, raisins, that almost like Christmas cake, if you know what that is, back in Ireland, or Christmas pudding.
Yep.
That note. There's a tiny bit of malt sort of shines through in that, and then a little bit of ginger, a little bit of spice in the back end. But like,
so good.
We love pouring this whiskey out, and this is the whiskey that got the double gold in San Francisco this year, and it's actually voted best Irish whiskey under 7 years a couple of years ago at San Francisco as well. And I love this because this is a Friday night, 5 o'clock, doesn't take itself too seriously whiskey, but it's such a crowd pleaser from people who like blended Scotch to maybe only tried some of the big guys within Irish, who are in, maybe people who are into Japanese whiskey, so people are in whatever. If you like whiskey in any sort of facet or region, you will appreciate this, but it'll deliver more to you than you think Irish whiskey is if you have these misconceptions or these assumptions, and it gives you an opportunity to talk more about the different things that are more down here in terms of single pot still, in terms of single malt, in terms of all of that, and double distillation, all of that.
All right. Well, then that's a perfect segue into question 2, which kind of goes back to our question 1, or not question 1, but our first drink. But I heard that in the beginning, you were selling poutine out of the trunk of your business partner's car. Is that true? And if so, I hear there's a great story wrapped around there somewhere. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I thank Jenny McGuire for that one. Thank you very much. So we initially started self-distributing in Ireland, which is an absolute pain in the backside. It's awful. So I got Brian Fagan's brother's car because he emigrated, which is a Volkswagen Golf. And I used to go to bars and liquor stores, and we call them off licenses back in Ireland. And I would try to sell them our poaching. And then I would write them an invoice on like a pad of paper. Yep. And I get them to sign it. I take a picture of it, not exactly legally binding, I wouldn't say. And then I keep on checking in, and when they sold out, I would try to sell them more, but also try to get the money from them, because it would be like 60 days would be the terms. And there's a couple of publicans and places that were a little bit tough to get money from, shall we say. So it was one part poaching salesperson, other part somewhat debt collector in a nice way. So we used to do that. But the event or the issue or the what have you is is what's being referenced. Is we did a talk with L. Mulligan and Grocers. No, it wasn't L. Mulligan. It was L. Mulligan and Grocers Sister Bars, which was something. It was like J.E. Kavanagh's. It was Kavanagh's anyway. Was the name of the bar. It was in the north side of Dublin. It's a little bit of a transitional area, as they'd say over here in the US. I know you're in Brooklyn. It's like Brooklyn in the 80s, Brooklyn in the 90s. You know what I mean? So it's a bit of that going on. And anyway, we're doing a talk, and I'm talking on behalf of Glendalough. We have Alex from Teelins, because they were just set up around the same time. We've Mark from Pierce Lines, who was their distiller, an American chap. We had Oliver Hughes, God rest him, from the Dingle Distillery. Rest in peace. He died very suddenly a couple of years ago. And we were all having a panel discussion. Sean Ian, who's the proprietor of the place, was chatting about it, and it was like a little bit of a gathering, and we had a couple of local press there, and we're just sort of chatting about future of Irish whiskey and distillation and all that. So we stayed around for a couple of pints afterwards, and then I go to my car to throw all my stuff in it, because I live just down the street in Stoneybatter, to make sure everything was good, and the car had been broken into. Oh. And then we go back in, and then we look on the cameras, and then the window got smashed in. A guy started grabbing cases, because there's all these cases of poaching in it, and legs it off. And then he comes back with a pram, what you guys would call like what do you call it? A baby stroller, right? Okay. Comes back with a baby stroller, throws a load of cases in the baby stroller, and then fucks off. Goes over to like the flats and the tenements or whatever like that. So there's a couple of people having a good old time for the next while. But that wasn't the only time my car was broken into in Dublin. There was two other times as well. One was underground in like a parking garage, and it was like some like junkies, and they broke into the car, and I happened to be coming down, and I started to chase them. The good thing about junkies is they don't run very fast, because they're sort of like strung out. So they dropped the cases. I think we broke one bottle. And then another time I was dropping into account, and a window was smashed, and then someone yelled at them, and I'm giving Dublin a very bad rap here. I'm very sorry about that. No, but anyone who has probably self-distributed and sort of done things the hard way in that fashion will have stories about this, and we'll have that one time the car broke down, and then this happened, and then that happened, and so yes, that is one of them. That's having fun chatting. I don't know what we do. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Well then, on to question 3, drink 3. What are we drinking?
So what we are going to try next is our pot still Irish oak cask. It's an innovative project we've been working on for the last 6 years or so, and it's something that we're actually really, really proud of. So I'll probably start first with the whiskey. So this is a pot still whiskey. And pot still whiskey is the defining point within Irish whiskey. It's a style that can only be made on the island of Ireland. It's geographically protected. So like your bourbon can only be made in the US, pot still whiskey, Irish pot still, single pot still can only be made within Ireland. And it's a weird quirk in time, like a lot of things within Irish whiskey. It's all sort of geared around the British and taxation. So in the 1700s, barley was king and Irish single malts were king. That's the style that was making its way all around the world, exported all over the globe. It was drank by Russian czars, royalty, aristocrat, dominant whiskey into the US right up until Prohibition was Irish whiskey. But at that period in the 1700s was Irish single malt. So a lot of these bigger distilleries in the towns, in the cities that are sort of dotted in that map over there behind me, they were very good at evading tax, misreporting, barrels going missing, all that type of thing going on. And there was all these different measures that were introduced to actually capture the tax from these distilleries. And they sort of, they got up in arms a bit about it. And then in 1785, they introduced a malt tax. So this taxed the only component within single malts, which was malted barley. So this led distillers to start sort of innovating and experimenting is probably a better word on how to evade this. So they started to use unmalted barley or green barley within the mash, and they distilled it, aged it. They said it was the purest thing that ever came from the pot still. They call it pure pot still whiskey or single pot still whiskey, or more recently Irish pot still whiskey. So a new style of whiskey was born out of that law and in that period of time. And pot still whiskey is really renowned for two things. It's renowned for texture. It's big, it's oily, it's robust. It's often said that there's eating and drinking in a glass of pot still whiskey. And then secondly, it has this sort of tangy underlayer of spice known as a pot still characteristic. So our whiskey is 2/3 unmalted barley, 1/3 malted barley, and triple distilled. Standalone mash bill, we're the only people that are doing that mash bill, and that leads a lot into the texture of this whiskey. But that's the whiskey, but that's only really where the story starts with this. This is a single cask offering. So we went into the Wicklow Mountains and we sustainably felled 14 trees that gave us 50 casks. Every single bottle, if you can see here, is notated what tree it's from, cask it's from, batch it's from, bottle it is. And you can actually go onto a link onto our website there, and it's going to show you how we chose that specific tree, how we brought it down half the quarter it stated, how we built the barrel, how we charred it, how we filled it with whiskey. So true traceability right back to the tree. And for every tree we take down, we actually plant 7 more. So to date, we've actually planted over 1,000 indigenous trees in the Wicklow Mountains. The trees that we actually use are a rare native breed of Irish oak called Dark Galda. And this species of oak, and Irish oak in general, this and another species of Irish oak, used to have 90% coverage on the island of Ireland. So before Ireland was called the Emerald Isle, it was actually called the Wooded Isle. It used to be covered in trees. So through shipbuilding, again, English, it sort of goes that way, and unsustainable harvesting, so essentially clearing areas, and then an invasive species coming in, that there's very, very few of these Irish oak trees left. We are very lucky where we are in Wicklow, where they're pretty much growing in these mountainous regions and on these old manor houses. So we've been all over the world looking at different casks, and from Kentucky to Montilla in Spain to further afield, which we'll talk about. But we did all of that and we started to learn about our own indigenous oak. We got fascinated. It's extremely fast growing due to the growing season within Ireland. This has a knock-on effect in terms of the actually on a chemical level down to the cell walls. The cell walls are thinner, and so you're going to get a lot more interaction, extremely porous wood. On a chemical level, there's higher levels of vanillins, aldehydes, furfurols, and ligands, which is very hard to say, especially once you've had 2 drinks. But if you have 4 drinks, it's hard to say. But long story short, what all of that leads into is this 2 flavor components of Irish oak. One is this sort of black molasses, sticky toffee pudding, sort of maple syrup, this very, very rich sweetness. That's 1. Then 2, you're going to look at this sort of, how would you say, earthy, almost herbaceous, barky tannin, like deep, deep tannin note. And for us, we thought it was only right that the more we learned about it, that Irish whiskey was aged in Irish oak. Specifically this style that can only be made on the island of Ireland, and it's a sort of self-determination for us of what should Irish whiskey taste like, and it's a way to celebrate and embrace our own heritage and our own factors of production, but protect and embrace as well a terroir-driven flavor profile that has no bullshit around it. And we're extremely proud with how it came out, and there's absolutely nothing else out there like it. So we're super proud. But
it is fucking amazing. I know when we did the video before, when you got to walk me through this again, it is just truly a fucking magnificent whiskey. So I
love this, and like the massive thing for this is the weight of this. We talked about that mash bill 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 unmalted. So if you think of green barley is green. It's alive. Like it's the type of thing, if you're a kid and you put it in your mouth, it's green. Like if you put malted barley in your mouth, it breaks up, it's like bread. So the oils from the brewing process are still there. From the distillation process, in the aging process, there's huge weight to this, and it makes its way when you like look at the legs down the side of the glass. Jesus Christ, they will stay forever. So you roll around the side, it's probably about 3, 4, maybe 5 seconds. I get this like beautiful like orange marmalade, citrus note, hint of that sort of maple syrup, but then even into those darker like leather and clove components coming through, that sort of dark, almost spicy, but yeah.
Yeah, I totally get the leather and the clove like that, and it's so good. It like just coats like it is such a really great thing, and like that's oh, it's just magnificent. And do with again, jumping from like question 4, it really comes down to you guys are kind of known for a little bit of your wood process. It's now become kind of a part of your history, almost like what you said in the very beginning. It's all the whiskey is only the start of the story, whereas you guys are doing the replanting, but also your whiskeys are known for a lot of like you have the double oak, you have the Mizunara, now you have the Dergaelic, like all of that. Like what made you want to go that route with experimenting with a lot of the woods itself?
We used our Galda, which is Quercus robur.
Okay.
Where Dargaelic, which the Middleton Distillery uses, is Quercus petra. So they're two different species of Irish oak. And they grow a little bit differently. And one is pedunculated oak, one is Cecil oak or Cecil oak, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So there's different growing patterns and there's different densities of the oak within that.
So then, are you guys the only ones that are using that version of the Irish oak?
I'd have to double check, but I think I'd be confident in saying yes of their Dargalda. Yes, I believe so. But people might be doing some really cool stuff now on a smaller scale, and so I put a question mark of like most likely, but not 100% sure.
Yes.
Well, yeah, no, you talk about like the finishes and the casks, and that's been a huge focus for us, and I think that's initially sort of a nice way to navigate the flavor profile of a distillate, and increasingly you are going to see more stuff from us in terms of what we want to do and what we're getting to is grains that are actually growing in Wicklow, so you can actually be off the ground. So we have partnerships with a couple of organic farms that are growing grains for us that we're incorporating into our distillate. So that's something that I think a lot of distilleries are doing on the island of Ireland, and I think it makes the most sense, and I think it's great. And a lot of maltsters will start talking about that, and of how their business has grown, and a lot of our grains, historically within Irish whiskey, were coming from France, and I believe, which was like French corn. It was a lot of it, which is crazy. So that's a huge thing that we're doing, but a lot of distilleries are doing that. But we want to be looking at even getting down to, well, what are the things that can really speak to the area where we're from? How can we be off the ground, off the ground, of the wood, and even off the air? So cultivating these strains is something that we've been seriously looking at. It's something that we've actually been talking to a lot of people. And another side of our distillery is our wild terroir gins, and we work with Geraldine Cavanagh. She's mastermind behind that with Rowdy, our head distiller. And so to look at something that can be off the ground, of the air, of the wood, then you're getting to this region where you can actually capture more of this. I think terroir is obviously like the bullshitty wine term, but you can be of a place, you know what I mean? So we want to look at more around that. And that's sort of where we're going with it. Yeah.
This is something truly special. And I think even at the price point, you guys are fucking selling it way too goddamn cheap. So that is everybody, like, this is just something really fucking special. Like, to me, like,
and there's not another Irish whiskey that tastes like this. And that's what I'm really proud about, because it expands what Irish whiskey is. And I think that is so fucking cool.
Yeah.
And if you put this out for someone who thinks Irish whiskey is light and sweet, their mind's blown, you know? Absolutely. Like, rye drinkers seem to like this a lot because there's an intensity of flavor. There's that dark malt and the molassesy quality in the mid palate. It's almost chewy in terms of the whiskey, in terms of the weight of it. And then that leafy, herbaceous tannin note on the back end, almost like tree bark.
Yeah.
You can taste the tree. And my favorite tasting note that someone said on this whiskey was, it's like a, what was it? It was like a somewhat dirty woodworking shop, but in a nice way.
Oh, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Like that
makes perfect sense, but it also doesn't. And I love that. I love that, you know.
Oh.
One thing I want to say on the casks of this is when we actually stave it, we'll actually take the stave. So not quite staves for a barrel, but we'll essentially take the intersections. And we'll take the intersections of the tree. So we've brought the we've half and quarter of it. So not quite staves, but they're in intersections. We're actually going to send those a couple of thousand, well, about 1,000-ish miles away. No, about 2,000 miles away to Montilla in Spain, where we get our Oloroso sherry cans for our double barrel. And we're actually going to dry age those, we're going to call them intersections, for over a year to season them in the dry air in Spain. And then so that's going to prime the wood in the best manner to be able to deliver that flavor profile, that really impactful flavor profile. Additionally to that, when they are building the barrels, we don't use any fuel source, no gas, nothing like that. They'll actually use leftover oak from the whole process. And so it's all done in that manner. And all of that manner is to season the oak in the best way to actually deliver that. So we would have a very, very light toast to it.
Oh, nice.
That's it.
That's awesome. Is that wood, is it like soft and really kind of hard to work with, like making the barrel, or is it like perfect for barreling?
No, it's not super soft. The trees that we're taking down are very, very old trees. So we'll take down trees that are 80 years plus, that are more at risk of coming down. So they're not soft. Like some of the woods we'll talk about are like very, very soft. But there's definitely more of a sort of porous nature to it. Like, so for instance, when we fill the casks, there's like between 7 and 9% are going in within a couple of months, just going into the wood. So it's thirsty wood, but in terms of molecular level compared to other oaks, it's not going to be that sort of soft, indented with your fingernail type character, you know. And one thing I will say about the trees that we take down, so as previously just mentioned, we're taking down these older trees, but we take them down in this method called, I always mess this up, continuous forest coverage management system, right? So which needs to be some type of acronym. There's not. But in any case, so what we do there is we'll choose the oldest and most at risk of falling down trees. We're going to take them down in a way of creating a clearing, and where the sunlight can actually hit the forest floor, but you haven't cleared out an area. So, and then for every tree we'll take down, we have these clearings, and that's where we're going to plant the saplings. So the sunlight can hit them, the invasive species isn't going to just overwhelm them, and that way we're actually setting it up for the future, which is really cool. So,
that's awesome.
And every tree that we've actually planted is protected forever and is never going to be taken down.
All right. What are we drinking next? Question 4, drink 4. What are we drinking?
Question 4, drink 4. So what we are trying next is actually my favorite whiskey that we've ever done. And this is a discontinued vintage for us. It is a 7-year single malt aged in a black pit porter cask. And this to me is so cool because it's an intersection of two different drinking cultures and sort of drinking histories within Ireland. So for this, we worked with an ex-brewer from Guinness called William Harvey. So he used to brew for Guinness and used to procure the different ingredients as well and all that. But he sort of got sick of that sort of rat race, corporate life and stuff like that, and the sort of big brewing type of thing. He set up a tiny brewery in the Black Pits in Dublin, which has a big history. So that's sort of in the shadows of Guinness. And he resurrected originally what Guinness was, which was a plain porter, which has dark malt, chocolate malt, and pale malt. They're the three malts within it. So there's actually a Dubliner song, which is a drop of the plain is all you need, right? A drop of, and it comes from a Flann O'Brien story as well. So it's very much sort of in the culture. It's sort of like whatever happens to you, a pint it'll do you fine. It's all you need. But so that's originally what Guinness was before it became a stout. It was a porter. And there's the Dublin porter is the plain porter, and it's different to all the other styles, and it's what really made Guinness. And it's known for having a big, strong malt backbone into the sort of, it's similar. It's actually molassesy, dark. So similar enough to the pot still, but not quite there. More in that sort of cocoa and sort of chocolate nibs as well, sort of mixed into that. Nice. So that's one aspect, and we're very friendly with them. And we had this Irish single malt, which is like a classic Irish single malt. We've talked a little bit about it. Unsmoked, unpeated, typically within Ireland because of the availability of coal as a fuel source versus to turf or peat in Scotland. So your Irish single malts were seen as cleaner. This is Irish single malts were dominant, and then Irish single malts and Irish pot still. But they were known for having a strong malt backbone as well, so being very malty whiskies. So there's an intersection of a flavor profile, which is just malt, for in the 1700s. So we thought that was cool. So we gave William Harvey, we gave him an ex-whiskey barrel of ours, right? So it aged a single malt in it, originally an ex-bourbon, aged an Irish single malt in it for 7 years. We took the whiskey out. We gave him the barrel. He filled it with that plain porter. He aged it for a year. Then we took that barrel back. He sold that beer as a limited release. We took that barrel back, and then we finished this whiskey within that barrel.
Excellent. Do I need my pour of Guinness with this one as well?
Yeah, you do. Actually, yeah, you do. So this is Guinness in a bottle. People are always going to tell you this Guinness is best, that Guinness is best, and all that type of thing. This is one I like because it's what was popular before is like Guinness on draft. There's a little bit of carbonation to it. So what we wanted to do is sort of make something that was like unapologetically one-dimensional and focus on a flavor profile that was of the time, of the era. And this is that. It's big and bold, and it's complete malt bomb. It's complete malt bomb. Do not let the color surprise you, because this is actually lighter in color compared to the double barrel, but now in the taste and in the weight as well, in the taste in the nose, it's dark. It's very, very dark. Toffeed apples and into like cocoa, almost sort of like hot chocolate elements to it, dark chocolate. What are you thinking, Tim?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely getting the chocolate here. Oh fuck yeah! Wow. Okay. Wow.
A little bit of like citrus zest to it, like a little bit of orange, and then chocolate, yeah. Toffee chocolate, caramel chocolate, dark chocolate, cooking chocolate, cocoa nibs.
Getting a lot of like the chocolate, like it reminds me of the chocolate orange zest, like the orange rinds, like so it's like candied orange rinds that have been like dipped in chocolate.
You are not the first person to say that. It definitely has that orange and chocolate, and there's a candy, as you would say, in Ireland called Terry's chocolate orange.
Yeah,
it's chocolate and orange. It's so many different layers of chocolate. And then you do get that citrus and that like sort of brighter orange zest note to it, which is very different to the pot still, which is more like darker, sweeter, fancy orange marmalade. This like bright orange zest and chocolate and malt. And it's in all the different iterations of where chocolate and malt are. Say if you're to look at the flavor wheel again, to steal that analogy back, this is all of them. It's an absolute malt bomb. And this is my favorite. And if you have to have it like a swig of your Guinness, you know, you're gonna look at that malt, that rich, that you know, sort of molassesy and just like malt, almost like that, so like malt mix, like chocolate malt milkshake element to it.
Wow, that totally changes it.
Yeah.
Wow, you're right. It totally turned it almost into like a milkshake.
Yeah. So we're really happy with this, and this was a release that, you know, it probably really started off really slow for us. Like we put this out, you know, we worked really hard to get this out places, and you know, people sort of picked at it a little bit because, you know, you're talking around be 55-ish type price point when it came out. And you know, when it came out for Irish whiskey, 55 was a lot. You know, there wasn't many whiskeys that were 55, and if they were, they probably had older age statements on them than the 7 year, you know what I mean? And then people started to really catch on, and then started to sell a lot because people liked it, and I think the right people started to try it and really like it. And then very, very quickly, it sold out for us. But it went from it being tough to sell to, oh no, my God, we're completely out. Well, in a very, very sort of quick period. So it was a bit of a strange one like that, sort of how that all came about.
Well, so is there plans to bring it back? Because I know it's discontinued. So is there plans to do another?
No, there's not. Unfortunately, it's not feasible with the brewery to be able to do something like that and have that amount of their beer sitting in RX whiskey casks, etc., etc. It's not feasible to do that, unfortunately. We might do some like one-offs with them, like, you know, distillery exclusives or airport exclusives that are in the same vein. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be something that you're going to see on the shelves again.
So then, on to question 4.
Yes, sir.
Who's St. Kevin, and how to get on the label?
Gotcha. Yeah. A lot of questions about St. Kevin or the imagery on the front. Is that St. Francis, Christ the Redeemer, all that type of stuff? So I'd be happy to tell you the story. So St. Kevin actually founded a monastic settlement in Glendalough in the 6th century. So and that's actually where monastic settlements like Glendalough, that's where they came from. But the story of him himself, he was born into nobility in the 6th century in Ireland. He was supposed to be the next king of Leinster, which is the big area around Dublin. And it's said that he had this sort of wild streak and independent streak, and you know, he wanted to make his own way in the world. So he goes over the Wicklow Mountains where he's doing a bit of soul searching, trying to figure things out. And it said that he got to the top of the mountains and he looked down, seeing these 2 pristine lakes, and he was drawn to them. And the second he went in between those 2 lakes, he became religious. And because of his strength of character, his charisma, his preaching, everyone in the locality flocked there and wanted to live around this holy man. And to this day, in between those 2 lakes is a 6th century monastic settlement, which is Glendalough, which is known as the City of the 7 Churches. 1,400 years later, it's still there. Over 1 million people a year go there. But the story that's depicted on the front of every one of our bottles is St. Kevin and the Blackbird. So it's said that St. Kevin used to pray up to his waist in ice cold water with his hands upstretched towards the heavens, because monks were into that type of shit at the time. But it said that he was very harmonious, very at one with nature. A blackbird flew down and landed into his hand. The blackbird was so appeased that she laid her eggs, and St. Kevin stood like that for 2 weeks until the hatchlings hatched, as they're known to do, and flew off. So long-winded, I know, but the reason we put that on our bottles is twofold. One, it's a nod back to these monastic settlements like Glendalough. Like, I was born and raised 8 miles from there in a small town called Greystones, that's just by the coast. And like the primary school, or like, you know, elementary school was called St. Kevin's, so it was closest to my house. Like, it was very much ingrained with it. And we're all from in and around the area there, all of us who set it up. And, you know, part of it was like the places like just down the road is where the birthplace of distillation occurred in these old monastic settlements. So why you know, and so I think that was one element that really drew us rather to St. Kevin. And the second thing was the character himself. You know, he had an easy way in life, but he turned his back on that, did something meaningful, something fucking worthwhile, made his mark in the world, built a civilization in isolation in the Wicklow Mountains. 1,400 years later, people are still talking about him. And we think that's something that you can't not admire. You know, we want to make our own mark in the world, and we want to make remarkably different Irish whiskies and more recently wild terroir gins that, you know, in some way make their own mark in the world. And we would be honored is in like a couple of hundred years if people are still talking about us. So, you know, we put this this phrase in the bottom of all of our bottles, which is stand apart, and that's in terms of our mindset, in terms of everything. But that's really what he did. He stood apart from anyone else of his era, and yeah, we thought that was something to strive for in how we approach things.
Excellent. And then St. Kevin's Day is vastly approaching. How do you plan on celebrating?
St. Kevin's was patron saint of wilderness is St. Kevin. So I like, you know, when I'm not working to sort of try to get out somewhere on some type of hike and bring my dog and do something like that. So I'd probably go for some type of hike, and then when I get to the top, I'd have something in my backpack to be able to sit down and have a cocktail and admire the view. So that's how I would do it. You know, but undoubtedly some of you know, some whiskey with St. Kevin on the front of it wouldn't go amiss. And if it's a nice day, some gin with St. Kevin on the front of it would not be bad, and a nice gin and tonic or a bee's knees.
So on to drink 5, question 5.
Drink 5, question 5. Let's go, Tim. So what we are going to try next, because we're pulling out all the stops for you, because you're Mr. High Roller here. We are going to try another discontinued whiskey of ours, which is our Glendalough 13-year-old single malt Mizunara cask. And this whiskey is a bit of a chameleon of a whiskey. You know, people don't really know how to place it, and that's sort of by design. And you know, we had this this great single malt, and you know, we talked a bit about single malt and classic Irish single malt and all that, and we wanted to bring it to completely new depths. And in our weird sort of look around those different breeds of oak, from Oloroso to obviously bourbon, and looking into Irish oak as well, we learned about Mizunara. And Mizunara, which is Quercus mongolica, which is in Mizunara itself means water wood. It's Japanese oak. It's oak that grows in Japan, and it is weird as all hell. So the trees take between 300 and 500 years to grow. At that, they do not grow straight. So if you go into Missouri or wherever, you know, a lot of the Quercus alba, it grows straight, it grows quick. This grows slow, and it grows like this. It grows out all over the place. Like the actual oak itself is so soft you can indent it with your fingernail. Highest level of moisture than any other oak that's out there. No one should ever make a cask from it ever. It's prone to leak and it's prone to cracking. It's a weird quirk in time how the Japanese coopers became skillful at actually even using this oak. So after the Second World War, in the very, very early years of the Japanese whiskey industry, there was a trade embargo between the US and Japan. So they were bringing in inexpensive bourbon casks that were coming in after Prohibition, because in America, you have to use new American oak for new American whiskey. So after you take your whiskey out of that new American oak, now it's not new American oak anymore. So now you see, you know, they call that the bourbonization of the whiskey industry. That's a different story entirely. So now, anyway, back to Japan, these people are sort of like, well, what are we going to do? So the coopers start chopping down their own indigenous oak and became extremely skillful at building these casks from it. They'd actually seal the casks with almost these like sort of ferns and leaves to evade cracking to it, in like this massive like craftsman, slow, meticulous, you know, apprenticeship style the Japanese are renowned for. We thought this was fascinating. So we got a weird introduction through a sort of a cooperage broker who would help us source different casks and different prices and stuff like that. He was essentially said, we know someone who you might want to go over and talk to. And so we went over to Hokkaido in Japan, and we went there and visited the last independent cooperage in Japan. And the fact that we were the first Irish people they ever met, and that we actually went over and met with them, they were very blown away by. And they agreed to build us virgin Mizunara casks. And this was the first time it's ever been done. So it's like 6,000 miles away. So they made us virgin Mizunara casks, and they shipped them over to Ireland. But they didn't write Glendalough Distillery, Glendalough Irish Whiskey Limited, company name or address on it. They just wrote Ireland on the cask in Japanese calligraphy, which is absolutely hilarious. But in any case, what we were looking for with this was what the Japanese call like a Kara influence, is what Mizunara does, which is this intense tropical fruit, mango, pineapple, lime zest, then into sandalwood and honeycomb and almost this nutty quality to it. So our whole goal with this whiskey was to take the classic Irish single malt, strong backbone, malt backbone that we've talked about before with the 7-year, and put it on planet Mars, to take it completely off the grid, do something that's never been done before. And it came out absolutely beautifully. This is a whiskey for solving all the world's problems at 2 o'clock in the morning. Nobody knows how to place this. Because if you're into your scotches and you see single malt on it, you go, oh my God, I didn't know they did single malt in Ireland, because a lot of Scotch drinkers don't. And then it has Japanese calligraphy on it, but it also says Irish whiskey. And then really what sort of knocked this out of the park, to use an American phrase that anyone who's Irish who's watching this is going to say, Jesus, look at Donal saying American phrases. But this whiskey got voted in the top 20 whiskies in the world. And a lot of people paid notice to that. And a lot of people would be into your award chasing, Pappy Van Winkle type things, really got turned on to this. So this really put us on the map as a world-class whiskey distillery, producer and bottler. And I think it came out beautifully. And what this whiskey has in spades is really what I find, and in my experience in my near 15 years working in Irish whiskey, is this has something that people want, which is complexity. And complexity to me is different on the front to the middle to the finish. And like a depth of flavor that keeps you coming back to the glass saying, what am I tasting? Why am I tasting it? And this is it's just wild. Yeah. If you're looking at this, it has this bright yellow mango sort of that honeycomb sweetness to it as well in the nose. The texture to this is unlike any of the other whiskeys that we've tried. It has a velvety texture where it just sort of hovers, just sort of there.
Well, it's magnificent. It's one of my favorites. So like this is just, you can't go wrong with this. This is just
not into that like peach and nectarine, that bright yellow fruit. Gets it almost into that like sandalwood and sort of the woody note towards the end of the middle. And then like the finish, it just goes on and on and on. And the finish is, even to me, and I'm extremely familiar with this, it's always very hard to place what the finished flavor profile is. There's like a tingle there, but it's not a burn, it's not a spice, it's a slight tingle. It's like a little bit of a sort of woody element, but it's not quite oak, and it's like, yeah. Again, like it's a whiskey for solving all the world's problems at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's that sort of thing that you're having. You bring it out for something special, for a celebration or a serious conversation or a catch up with an old friend, or it's that noteworthy. Let's mark the occasion type of thing. Again, it's like nothing else. And to wrap it back, it's like it's a whiskey that stands apart. And every one of our whiskeys, we try to make them in a mindset and in a method that sort of stands apart from anything else in the space, in the realm, in the category.
All right. So then on to question 5. Our last and final question, not even close to midnight, but here we are. You can flip it, you can spin it, you can do whatever you want, but the Whiskey Wednesday coin will tell us the answer. Question 5. Is it true that your business partners wanted you to be more like St. Kevin and they sent you to the coldest place in the earth, which they thought was Chicago, and they wanted you to be more like St. Kevin?
So I need to. So what am I doing here? Do I need to flip this to say yes, no?
Yes.
All right. So I got a fuck no.
Well, of course.
There you go. I got a fuck no. No.
Yeah. I mean, Chicago is cold, but it's not the coldest place in the earth. But
no.
Yeah.
No, I was messing around with the idea of getting a St. Kevin tattoo on me, but I was of the area where you got tattoos where people couldn't see them, and then I've been of the era of getting those tattoos taken off.
Oh.
So, so it would have been more if they caught me when I was a bit younger, maybe it would have been more of an easy one. But they're never pushing that. I wanted to do it when we were in the sort of heyday to get something like that, as in like, you could just like put it on your left chest or something like that and say like, yeah, I bleed Glendalough or whatever.
A full back piece.
No, you see that's excessive, but yeah, maybe. No, I'm joking. I think we've been drinking whiskey now. Tim's talking me into things. Look what's happening.
Thank you so much for joining us. 5 drinks down, 5 questions answered, not even close to midnight. Thank you, sir. Be safe, stay healthy, and until we can drink in person, cheers to you, my friend.
Absolute cheers. And look, here's my puppy jumping in. That's
there she is.
Well, here, cheers. Thank you very much, Tim. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone who has listened and watched this. Yeah, it's a pleasure to share our stories, some of our spirits. So, cheers, Slanter.